Your
When I was
earliest.
6 years old, I lived in Greeley, Colorado at 614 12th Street beside the railroad tracks. And I met a lot of hobos. And I would find them very interesting. And they would tell me stories about their travels. And they would ask for food at my mother's house. She would always give them food. She'd have them do some little job, but she would always give them food. After they ate, they would sit by a tree and, like that one hobo, would whittle away and make a whistle. But I was fascinated. You know, they had a lot of stories. They've been around.
Yeah.
So I listened to a lot of stories from hobos when I was about 6 years old.
Were you supposed to go talk to the hobos?
Nobody cared. They were very friendly. You know, one of them might have been the world champion boxer because there was one hobo that was thrown off a train. And when he got to the next town, he saw the people that threw him off the train, and he beat them all up. And a man saw that and said, "You're too good to stay in this little place in Colorado. Here's my card. When you come to New York, see me." And that was Jack Dempsey, and he became a world champion boxer.
So your mother then, she would take in a lot of these men and give them meals for a little bit of work?
Yeah, and she'd have them just do some little job like making kindling for the kitchen stove. I think our place was marked because different ones would come and stop at our place. So I think they had ways of telling each other, "This is a good place. They'll feed you."
Okay. Did you have your own room in the house?
No, I always had to share because I had four sisters and a brother. So I always had to share because we had a small house.
So
And
did you have bunk beds or did you have your own bed?
I had my own bed. Yeah, I had my own bed.
That was in Colorado, so of course it must have been very cold during the winters.
It was cold in the winter. Yes, it was.
What was bathing like, though, as far as getting bathed? What was that schedule like for you?
Oh,
I don't know what it was
sometimes
like.
we'd have a little tub about that big. And I remember they gave me a bath right in the kitchen by the stove that was nice and warm.
Okay.
And that was bathing.
Okay. Would your mom scrub you?
Well, could have been any one of my sisters.
Oh, okay.
I had four sisters. So they took care of little brother. I was the youngest, so I had to take orders from all of my older ones.
Was that fun?
Oh, once I ran away from home, but I missed it so badly I came right back.
How long were you gone when you ran away?
Probably a couple hours. And I got to thinking when it started getting dark, there at home at a nice table with food, and I'm out here in the dark. I don't even know where I am. So I went home.
Do you recall the way they received you when you came back home?
Very normal. They knew I was coming back.
That's funny. So that was when you were around 6 or 7
Yeah,
or
I
so?
think around 6 or 7.
What else do you remember from your early years, say before 10 years old? Do you remember?
We had an apple tree, and I lived in it, and we had a swing in the apple tree, and I swung in that tree. And when I went to grade school, I always liked to run to school, and my mother said, "You got to wear galoshes." Well, if you wear galoshes, you can't run very fast. So I would hide my galoshes under the front steps of the porch and then run to school.
Oh. But then would she find out your shoes
No,
were
she
wet?
never found out. And then when I played soccer, I could really run fast, and I didn't have those galoshes on, and I could run faster than all the rest of the boys, so I could be ahead of the pack and score.
Oh, that's fun. I didn't know you played soccer.
Yeah, I did when I was just little.
Yeah. Was it just one house that you grew up in, or was
Oh
there...
no, I grew up in several houses. We grew up in the house on 614 12th Street. The latest we know was a Coca-Cola bottling company now. And then we moved into another house not very far away and stayed there not very long. And then we moved up to a place on 8th Avenue. It was called 1842 8th Avenue. And it was across the street from 9 or 10 tennis courts. And guess what that meant for my future?
The handwriting was on the wall?
Yes, it was. So I always begged my older sisters to let me play tennis with them. They wouldn't let me play with them, but they said I could chase the balls or I could keep score. The day came when I could beat them all, but then I could just chase the balls and keep score.
When you were a little boy, did you have any good friends that you would spend a lot of time with?
Yeah, there was a boy down the block from me that loved to play tennis too, and so he and I played a lot of tennis. We even met in a tournament in Denver, Colorado when I was a little under 15. He was in that same tournament. It was called the Junior Tournament of Colorado, and I went on and won it.
Do you recall his name?
No, I don't. I think it was Spears.
What about school? Any teachers that you recall, special
Yeah, I
memories of
remember
teachers?
one teacher said, someday we're going to have a moving picture in a box. And I thought, what do you know? I found out what she knew. We did have a moving picture in a box. And in one class, I remember I was kind of a smarty in that class, and they sent me to the principal. He used what they couldn't do today. He used a rubber hose on me. And you know, after he got through with me, I sat up in class and listened.
So you say that worked for you?
That worked for me. And from then on, I concentrated on learning the multiplication tables.
That does take concentration.
Right.
So that was one teacher. Are there any other teachers from your early years there that you recall? First, second, third, fourth, fifth grade, anything through there?
No, I don't remember any more from them. It's just that the one that sent me to the principal.
Oh, yes. So that one left a marked memory.
Yes, it did. In junior high, my favorite teacher was my English teacher. And she gave an assignment where you had to give a speech in front of the class. I'd rather die than give a speech in front of a class. And she gave me an F because I wouldn't do the extemporaneous speech. And I thought, that's not very nice. And I had a crush on her, and she went ahead and married the tennis coach.
What was she thinking?
I don't know what she was thinking. She let me down.
Not only did she give you an F, she married the tennis coach.
Yes, right.
No one's perfect. You were scared of speaking, but of course later on you became a teacher, so you...
Well, after I became a Christian, they would ask me to do a little devotional. I thought to be faithful to the Lord, I should do it. So I did. And so I learned to talk in front of a group after I became a Christian, and that was after I was 14.
Okay. So that was what, your 8th grade or your freshman year?
That was sophomore year.
Oh, you were quite young.
Yeah, well, I was sophomore when I became a Christian at age 14.
So before I move on, you grew up in Greeley, but is there any other place where you grew up in Colorado?
No, just Greeley.
Okay. What about traveling? Did your family do any small trips anywhere? Or
The longest trip we ever made was one trip to Denver, Colorado. It's 50 miles away, and we had relatives in Denver, so we drove to Denver to see the relative.
Who is that relative?
His name was Alm, A-L-M, and he had a dairy farm.
Oh.
And he provided milk for Safeway stores.
So he was Swedish as well.
Yeah, he was.
As far as you're aware, was he the only other Swedish element of the
No,
family?
there was another one in our area where we lived, and he would bring my mother a sack of potatoes because, we didn't have much money, and she had to go to work cooking, which is the only thing she knew, and she cooked for the college girls all her life.
The college girls.
Yeah, in the dorms.
What school was that then?
Colorado State College. That's
Okay.
where I went to college one day.
Okay.
Berg. The dentist was a relative.
Oh, yeah, there was a dentist that was a relative, and I always went to him. And he didn't believe in deadening the teeth when he drilled on you. And every time I knew I was going to the dentist, I worried 2 weeks before I went because he made you suffer.
That's terrible.
And he wouldn't deaden because it took too much time.
So these relatives, all from Sweden,
Yeah,
were all in Colorado there. When your mother came over from Sweden, was she connecting with relatives who were already in the States?
she might have been connected with her brother who helped construct the San Francisco Bay Bridge. But I think to get into this country, you had to have someone meet you, or you had to have $25. And that was a lot of money then. And if you had $25, you could make it. If you didn't, they'd send you back. She came in 1901, and then I think she moved to Minnesota, and then I think she moved to Colorado, and that's probably where she met my father. The saddest thing I know is one day I had my mother, I had her record a whole bunch of stuff on my tape recorder, and I lost the tape, and I'll never forgive myself. She told me all the questions that you'd be asking today.
I see. Well, certainly there was correspondence between those family members.
Well, I think my mother may have written to people at home. The last time she heard from her mother, she got a big certificate bordered with black. Her mother had died.
And you were there for that?
I was there when I saw her read the letter.
I was there too.
That was kind of rough on her. She never saw her mother again. I've got a picture of my mother and her mother in my den. Yeah, she never saw her mother again.
Yeah.
Some of the relatives went to Sweden, like my youngest sister and her husband went to Sweden.
And Theus.
Oh,
Theus
yeah,
went.
and a nephew, Theus. He made it to Sweden.
So your mother met your father in Colorado.
Yeah, right. You know the story about my name. My father, like all the Swedish boys, had to join the army for 2 years. And when he was in the army, they said, there are too many Samuelsons. That was his name then. He said, your name is not going to be Samuelson anymore. It's going to be Bodeen. That's where I got my name. When my father-to-be had his name changed from Samuelson to Bodeen.
Now, was that World War I or was that prior?
Before World War I. She came to this country in about 1901.
So he had just had a stint of military service in Sweden.
He had 2 years.
That may have been obligatory at
Yes,
the time.
it was. All the boys had to spend 2 years. But they never got in the war.
So, do you know how they met? What the circumstances of
No,
their meeting?
and that would have been in that tape I was telling you about that I lost, and I'm so mad that I had all that information on how they met.
But it was in Greeley.
Yeah, it was Greeley.
Yeah.
He was a cobbler. He didn't just mend the shoe, he built the shoe.
I don't think there are very many cobblers around anymore.
I don't think there are.
It would be hard to make a living that way, I think.
Yes, it would.
And you never met your father.
He was gone just a short time before I was born. He had a problem with drinking and gambling, and he couldn't solve them. So I think he felt it was better that he just leave because of his example was very bad. And so he left. The last thing my brother remembered of him, he had a little case walking off to the train depot, and he left, I think, for California. Finally, he ended up in Oregon. If I'd only known, he was in Oregon when I came here in '53. He died 2 years after I came in Salem. He had committed himself.
Where did he commit himself to?
Things were going wrong with him, I think, mentally.
From the Salem Mental Hospital.
Salem Mental Hospital.
He was there 2 weeks.
Yeah.
He committed himself.
Mm. And how did you find out that he had been there?
My nephew, who is a Mormon, and they love all that stuff about genealogy, and he found out all that stuff and sent information to me.
Thais.
Yeah, Thais.
Now, I don't want to get too far off track, but I do want to ask about, you had met somebody who was our relative at the beach.
Oh, Cheryl.
Cheryl?
Cheryl and Don were at the beach. And they were walking along, and there was this little business card that was in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
And Cheryl picked it up. What was his name, Don?
Bodeen.
No, but I mean his first name.
I don't know.
Was it? Well, anyway, I can't remember if Cheryl would know. It was Joanne Bodeen. That's what it was. And it was spelled the way that we spell our name. How strange is that a Bodeen would find this in the sand of a Bodeen? It seems to me it was up near Lincoln City. And so she brought it home. And it had a phone number on it. And I thought, Don's two sisters were at that very time visiting us from Washington, Elvira and Clara. So here was this card, and I said, well, I'm going to call. So I did, and I got him. That's the funniest thing. I can't remember what his first name was. And I told him, I said, we had an interesting thing happen, and I told him what happened. And I said, it's just very interesting. We really think that you could be a relative. I said, my sister-in-laws are here visiting. May we drive over and meet you and go out to dinner? And he said, no, today's our anniversary. And I said, oh, well, I understand that. But I said, they're going to be here for a few days. Could we come on Friday? I think I said. And he began to hem and haw, make excuses. And I said, we really feel that you could be a relative. I think he was his father's son. So that would have made Don a half-brother. He said, well, to be truthful, he said, actually, my name is not even Bodeen. And I made the biggest mistake of my life. And I said, what was it, Samuelson? And there was this dead silence on the other end. And he said, I don't know what it was.
He did too.
Yeah, sure he did.
And Barbara, she wrote him a long letter. She's a smart cookie, and she wrote the reasons why we feel he was a relative. And he said, no, he said, I'm sure I'm not. Do you know that they picked up and moved to Idaho?
Oh, is that right? That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so that all ties into Grandpa's father, wherever he his life.
Family.
Yes, he did. It looks like, doesn't it? Yeah.
But I think he thought that we the patent on the shoe might have gone through. Maybe there was money involved, and he thought that we would want to.
Oh,
I think he thought that there was.
That you were looking for money.
Yeah.
Right. I see. Yeah. Well, Grandpa, so you have mentioned before that your brother was like a father to you.
He was.
So tell me about some things that he did for you.
Well, he quit school at 10 so he could help my mother pay bills. And he delivered milk for Gray's Creamery. Those days it came in glass bottles. And I learned that if you could trade those bottles in for a nickel a piece and you get a dime, because we get 2 quarts of milk every morning. And so I discovered I could go to the movies for a dime. So I started going to the movies with the money I made from selling back to any store that would take them 2 glass bottles, milk bottles. That's how I got to the last of a series, and I was so interested in that series. Every Saturday you had to come and find out what happened last week. I made the mistake of going to the store where my brother works. And when he came home, that's the only time he ever hit me. He knocked me over a bench. He was so mad at me for trying to sell the bottles that he was delivering milk with. But the end of that story is I was left alone a lot. When I was alone, I would explore empty houses, and I thought that was really fun. Until one day a big hand got hold of me, took me to the police office, and he told me, "You don't do that." And then they must have told my brother, who was kind of a father, what I'd done. And so he took me aside. He said, he knew I liked tennis. He said, "I'm going to give you an open sports account at PC Man's Sports Store. You can get any tennis equipment you need. Just don't go overboard, but get what you need. Tennis shoes, tennis rackets, tennis balls, anything you need." And so I did, and from then on, I lived on the tennis courts, and I played everybody who would play me until I could beat everybody in town. My brother said it was the best investment he ever made when he opened that account for me at that sports store.
So was he a teenager at that time?
Oh, no, he was 11 years older than I was.
So that was good insight from him.
He said it was the best investment he ever made when he said I could get any tennis stuff I wanted at PC Man. And I went on to win the junior championship of Colorado finally. I just lived on the tennis courts.
So your mom gave you time to play a lot of tennis then?
If she ever needed me, I was just across the street. Once in a while, one time, she locked me up sent me to my bedroom and said, "Stay there." And I was upstairs. I climbed out the window, across the street to the tennis courts, and played tennis, came home, climbed back up and in. She never knew it, that I'd climbed out that window, and played tennis, and came back.
Sounds like you got away with a lot of things.
Yeah, I did.
But you must have also had to work quite a bit as a young man.
Well, jobs, I could never make much money. I mowed the neighbor's lawn for 10 cents, and there was one house I took care of for a whole month, and all I had to do was water it every other day and mow it and rake it and all that. And for a whole month, I made $5. Boy, did I feel rich. $5. At another job near a Safeway store, they had a bunch of bricks with a mortar on it, and they give you so much money for each brick. You scrape the mortar off, and pretty soon I had enough money to go to a movie, and I could buy a candy bar and popcorn and go to the movie. And I remember I went to King Kong with the money I made, scrape mortar off those bricks.
Interesting. Is that the one where he climbs up the Empire State Building?
Yeah, that's the one I saw. It cost me a dime to see it.
About what year was that then?
What year would that have been?
Would have been 1939 because I went to the same movie.
Oh, okay. There you go, 39.
Okay.
She went to the same movie.
That was my first date I ever had.
Your first date.
But my sister had to go with me because my mother wouldn't let me go alone.
Oh, yeah. That's good. So you were in high school at this time. So I guess you had already accepted Christ, right?
Well, not already. My brother was dating a farmer, and the farmer would come over and play checkers with me while he waited for my brother and he to go out. But one day he went to a meeting where he accepted the Lord and he became a Christian. And he came to the house and tried to win my brother and he couldn't. And he asked me if I wanted to go out with him. He had to get Prestone. This is at midnight? And I said, sure. So when he got me out to the pickup, he said, would you like to accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? I said, I think I would. He took me up to the pastor's house. The pastor made sure I understood, and he led me to the Lord, and I knelt between the farmer and the pastor. And at 12:53 a.m., I was a Christian. I was a sophomore in high school.
So he just knocked on the pastor's door in the middle of the night?
Yes, he did. Got him out of bed.
Lived just 2 houses away from me, where I live.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Did you know that, Grandpa?
I didn't know her at all then.
No,
I
Okay.
might have known her just a little.
you didn't know me.
No, okay, I didn't know her.
Well, that changed your trajectory quite a bit
Yes,
because
it did. And I got to the semifinals in high school tennis, and then I thought there are things more important than tennis, so I didn't even go out for tennis in my senior year, and I could easily have won the senior year because the people that beat me were all graduated, and but I was president of a group of kids that met every noon. We eat lunch together, sing choruses, and we had a good fellowship together. And finally we decided, why don't we write a letter to every kid and teacher in the high school and explain to them how to accept Christ. So my youth group at the church sponsored us, and we sent a letter to every kid and every teacher in the school. Explain to them the way of salvation. I thought that was more important.
yeah.
Don, how many were there in the high school?
About 800.
And how many people in your group, roughly?
Oh, I'd say about 20 to 25.
So you guys were quite busy.
We were busy. We were. I remember one boy, he said, you helped get us out of our closet. Because they were Christians, but they weren't telling anybody.
Yeah.
And then they started telling people. I remember one boy came to me and used to play football after school. He said, there's something different about you. And then I told him, I said, Joe, I've become a Christian. So after we sent those letters out, there was an assembly, and the principal explained some things. He said this thing about heaven. He said, heaven is like a wheel with a lot of spokes. And he said, there are a lot of ways to heaven. Well, if I'd had a chance, I could have gone up and said, Mister, you were a good basketball coach, but you're no theologian. The Bible said there's only one way to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. There's only one way. He said there were a whole bunch of ways. He was wrong.
Did you write him a letter as well?
Yeah, we wrote him and every teacher in the school.
They sent you to a psychiatrist.
Yeah, they did. My teacher sent me to a psychiatrist. He started in by trying to put the Bible down. I said, wait. I believe every word in that book is true. Then he sat down and wrote a note to my teacher. There's no hope for him. That's what the psychiatrist said to my teacher. There's no hope for me.
Who was this teacher?
Mrs. Spaulding.
And Mrs. Spaulding,
She was really a good teacher.
yeah.
But she'd tell a gal that was her sister, tell that Don Bodeen to quit bringing his Bible to class.
What did she teach?
Because she taught English.
Okay. Now, do you recall your graduation?
No, I don't. I don't think I even went. We were so poor, we couldn't even buy a picture for the annual. I think I would put out annuals one day.
Yeah. So after high school, you must have gotten some work or went to college. Which did you do?
Oh, after high school, I just got whatever job I could. I went to Denver and worked, and later on, I got a job at Greyhound Bus. I think $25 a week. And then I learned I could get a job in my hometown for $25 a week and live at home. And that's what I did until I went to the Army.
Now, what did you do in the Greyhound bus? What was your job?
My job was just to, put suitcases on the bus and give the tickets to the owners.
Okay.
So it doesn't sound exciting now, but $25 a week was a lot of money to me.
And then what was the job you got at home?
I worked with Wesley Peterson. He delivered potatoes to a potato chip factory, and there was a Mexican man and we had to sort potatoes and get rid of the culls, and number 2 and number 1s, we'd sack them and put them on a truck, and they'd take them to Denver, and that was my job, and I made $25 a week there.
Well, that's
by
better.
the time the day was over, I was tired because those sacks got heavy.
So you were able to save a little bit of money by doing that?
Yeah, I could date. And that girl I used to date, I could take her out and actually go into a restaurant.
That sounds pretty nice.
Yeah.
When had she seen you first?
Tell when you saw me first.
On an Easter sunrise morning, we went to Glenmere Park for an Easter sunrise service. And my sister had talked about Don. I heard the names of all of the people in the Bible club that he was in. And but I heard her talk a lot about Don Bodeen. But I heard her talk about a lot of them. But anyway, this Easter sunrise service, I was 13. And I went, and I think they mentioned that Don Bodeen was going to lead a chorus. And when he got up, I saw him. Now, I know this sounds strange. I was enthralled with him. He didn't know it. I was 5 years younger, almost. And I was so taken with him at 13 that I could not tell you another thing about that service. It was on a hillside in this beautiful park. And a girlfriend invited me home for breakfast. And I said I'd go with her, but I couldn't eat. I had lost my appetite. And she wondered what was wrong with me. Well, I wasn't about to tell her. I mean, I didn't know. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell anyone. I just wondered why was I so taken with him. And I watched him go back after he led the song. I could show you today exactly where he stood with his girlfriend. And I looked at her and I thought, what a lucky girl. But every mention of his name, I just riveted on it. I couldn't get away from it. That was the first time I saw him.
So, Grandpa, were you called up? Were you,
I was called. I got a nice letter from the president inviting me to be a soldier in the armed forces. So
would you call that an invitation?
Yeah. I was drafted.
You were drafted. And what year was that again?
Because the war started in 41.
Yeah.
It's about 43, I think.
Do you recall how long you had to get your things in order before going to training?
Oh, about a month. And then I went to Denver, and at Lowry Air Force Base, they checked you out, got you all the stuff you would need, and put me on a train to Amarillo, Texas.
And you probably knew a number of young men that were doing the same
Yes.
at the time.
Yes, I did.
Did you have conversations with your mother about you going into the service?
Well, she cried on my shoulder
When she heard the news?
that I was going. Yeah. Because a lot of boys didn't come back.
Yeah. Right. You said to me once that you recall as a boy hearing Hitler speak on the radio.
I did when I was in high school, and it was terrifying. And all of us boys thought we were going to be fighting Hitler next. Next thing we knew, we were fighting Japan. What happened? Something happened. Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. So you went down to Amarillo, Texas.
Yeah.
And how long were you in training there?
Oh, probably half a year.
And what do you recall from that training?
I remember that you had to get up early and go out and stand for roll call. All you had to do was say here when they called your name. And then we'd go to breakfast. I remember the sun was so big. There were no mountains to hide it. I was used to mountains. No mountains. And after breakfast, we would march for 50 minutes, and then they give us a 10-minute break. And then we'd march for 50 minutes, 10 minutes. We'd do that all day long till we learned how to march. And then we went to Amarillo and marched for the people. And I remember one Sunday, I had a Sunday off, and I went to a great big Baptist church in Amarillo, and it was packed, and the pastor could really preach. And after the service, no one spoke to me. I will never forget that. No one spoke to me in Amarillo, Texas at that church service. I went to another church later on, and everyone spoke to me, but that one, no one.
Sound like Southern hospitality?
No, it doesn't. So you were in the Army Air Force.
Yeah.
So this was before the Air Force became its own branch. It was a part of the Army.
I think so, because they call it the USAF.
Yes, and the Air Force did not become its own branch until 47.
Oh.
And I think that was some of the confusion that Uncle Don would have when he kept asking you if you were in the Army or if you were in the Air Force. Because at the time, the Air Force was a part of the Army.
Right.
But when Uncle Don was in, they were two separate branches.
I didn't know that.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So your training, you mentioned marching, but certainly you must have done other things other than marching.
Well, we went on bivouac, marched all night, and I remember we had aluminum cups and they put hot coffee in it, but the cup was so hot you couldn't drink the coffee. And by the time it got to the place where you could drink it, it was cold. So I remember those aluminum cups on bivouac. It was sure good to get back to the base where you could drink the coffee. I remember on the firing range I could never hit the bullseye. But I didn't know then. I needed glasses, but the Army didn't find it out until after I was out. I couldn't see where's the hoot.
So, what is your fondest memory of your time in the military?
Oh, I think when I was in Illinois, there was a Christian service center right close to the camp. And when I went there, I met a girl that was a wonderful piano player, and she would play the piano and we would sing and talk. So I really got acquainted with her. And before I left that field, she had invited me to her church and then to her home. But you know, when I was ready to go to her home, we were on the move again to Newport News to board ship to go overseas. So I didn't get to see her. The only thing I heard about her again was when her mother wrote to me and said she died at the piano, fell dead at the piano. So I really liked her, but that was over.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you were actually deployed, what was your job?
My students always wanted me to be a famous pilot, but I was a supply sergeant, and that's what it says on my discharge, supply sergeant. If a soldier needed pants overseas, I gave him pants. If he needed shoes, I gave him shoes.
When you were deployed, how many different places did you actually go overseas?
We stopped momentarily in Italy, and then in North Africa. I got on KP purposely so you could get something to eat. The next stop was India. Went through the Suez Canal to get there. But India, and then to Burma, and then to China, and then back to India. We were flown into Burma, and we were flown into Kunming, China, and then we were flown back to India, and then we were flown to Shanghai, where we boarded the ship for home. India, too much. I hated India. We were on the ship till we got to Bombay. The only thing the natives said was, hubba, 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 hubba. That's the only thing they knew.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I could never find out.
So
Hubba, hubba, hubba.
well, it's okay.
There were a lot of people I could talk to, but I couldn't understand.
Okay.
I went into a restaurant once and ordered something, and I don't know what it was, but I got deathly sick. And when I got back to the place where I was staying, the sergeant thought I was drunk. I said, I'm not drunk, I'm just sick. I said, I've never drunk a drop in my life. He finally believed me and sent me to the hospital in Bombay, the military hospital. And I was really sick to my stomach. Whatever was in that drink, I don't know, but it was poison to me. And I got well overnight in the hospital. They sent me back to my barrack. But I remember the one movie was on, and I could see it through the window, Deanna Durbin. I remember the movie. You could have shown it to your Sunday school class. It was that kind of movie. India was a miserable climate. You wear long sleeve shirts and helmets, and when you went to bed at night, you put a screen around your bed because that kept the mosquitoes away, and they were worried about malaria. Two things I remember. A cow came into our tent one night, and we chased the cow. You've heard of a sacred cow. You don't bother their cows. So we just chased him out. And the next thing I remember, I was asleep in bed, and a hand came up through my net, and I just banged that one. That guy was out of the service the next morning. He was one of those. They sent him home. I remember only once running for a foxhole, and that was in Burma, and the alarm went off one night. We all ran to a foxhole, but just once.
From the time you left port in the U.S., from the time you got told that the war was over, was that a year or 6
about
months?
20 months, 20 to 22 months. And then they said the war was over. And I said, it can't be over. It was going to take us years to get those Japanese out of the foxholes. They said, the atomic bomb. And then I learned about the atomic bomb. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were nothing. So the war was over.
You must have thought that that was a rumor at first when they told you.
At first I said it couldn't be, but when I heard about the atomic bomb, I believed it.
Did they make any sort of an announcement, or was it just rumor?
Well, it was another soldier told me, but he got it from a pretty good source because it was right.
That's hard to do in the Army.
Yeah, it is.
When you heard the announcement that the war was over, how long did it take before you were back in the States?
Oh, I'd say I was back within 2 to 3 months, because we were on the ship, and the scariest time I had on a ship was one day we saw a mine, and the guys were all yelling, "Mine, mine, mine," and pretty soon their guns were out there trying to shoot that. They couldn't hit it for beans, and it seemed to just drift away. Because at first we thought we're going to be on this ship and that ship was going to get bombed by the mine, but it went the other direction. That night we had a terrible storm, and I remember there was a garbage can that kept going back and forth and back and forth. And finally it kept going all the way and hit the bulkhead. And when it hit the bulkhead, all the soldiers jumped out of their bunks and they said, "Mine, mine, mine." They ran. I said, "It's not a mine, it's a garbage can." But they ran up on deck. They thought we were hit by a mine. That was the scariest time we had on the way home, when we thought maybe we'd hit that mine after all, and we hadn't. It was the only other thing they said that night was, "Man overboard." That was scary.
Was there really a man overboard?
Yeah.
Oh,
We had a riot on one of our ships because there were English cooks, and you know, American cooks and English cooks don't cook the same. And finally, we had a big group meeting with the main people, and they let some Americans go in there and cook, and the morale got better right away.
The riot was because English food was not sufficient?
It was bland. It was like their humor.
So, did you stop along the way, or did you cross right through the Pacific?
We crossed right through the Pacific. We just kept going till we got to Seattle. In Seattle, they said, calling Sergeant Bodeen. And so I had friends that used to be in my church on the ship, and they took me to their home, and I stayed overnight with a young man who liked her. He had a picture of her in his bedroom.
Oh.
And so I stayed overnight with him, and they took me back to the ship the next day. And then I stayed through Sunday, and I went to church with the girl I was supposed to marry, according to everybody else. And then when I came back, they shipped us to Fort Lewis, where we stayed for a few days before we caught the train home.
A train ride is what you took.
Yeah, to get back to Denver. Yeah, from Fort Lewis.
Wow, that must have taken a while.
But it was so wonderful to see our country again. Oh, it was wonderful.
And then, did you have out processing, or did they just pat you on the back and let you go?
Oh no, they sent us to Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, and that's where I got out processing.
How long were you there? For a week or so?
I think a day or two.
Okay.
And my sister and brother-in-law came after. That was Elvira and Harold. Came and got me.
Oh.
And they took me to their home, and then finally to my home in Greeley, Colorado.
So you must have been quite happy to see them.
Oh, was I thrilled, yes. And the next day they took me downtown and bought me 2 suits.
And then what did you do after that?
We went to Greeley, and I got to see my mother.
and they came to church that evening. I remember it
I think
distinctly
it was-
because I saw him come in and I could point to where he sat.
You must have been as skinny as a rail.
He was.
She had to fatten me up.
He was very thin.
Well, tell me about when you made it home to your mom.
Oh, well, of course, lots of laughing and hugging in tears. And I think we were in the backyard when we met, and we were just hugging and crying. It was so wonderful to see her again. She wrote to me faithfully, and she was such a wonderful mother.
So at that point, you're back from the service.
Yeah,
What were your next pursuits after that?
well, I thought, what am I going to do? And I remembered before I went in how I loved to teach. I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to teach. So I went to teachers' college. You know, all the boys wanted to date every girl around. You talk to Don, you'll find that out.
Was that common in your day? Because
Yeah.
nowadays it's not as
When
common.
you got home, you dated a lot because you hadn't been dating for years, and it was fun to date, but there was some more fun than others. When I went to the Army, her sister wrote to me all the time, long letters, and I really enjoyed them, but I could never get over that cute little sister. And one day the sister sent a letter, and there were 2 words in the letter. It said, "Love, Minta." Those are the words I remembered when I came home from the service. Love, Minta. We started dating as soon as I got home.
And his girlfriend, that everyone thought he would marry, had moved to Seattle.
Her father came to me and said, "What are your intentions regarding my daughter?" I said, "I'm going to graduate from teachers' college and then marry her." He said, "Okay." That was it.
When did you see Grandma again?
I didn't have a car, Ransom. So after church, we would walk all over town. And she liked it because it took a long time to get home.
The longer the better. Oh, we would walk up to the park, which was way out of our way and
Yeah.
way wrong.
It was fun to be with her.
I think it surprised me when he called me.
I called her.
Well, however, he went on 2 other dates before he called me. Because he didn't have a car, he went with his friend.
Anybody that had a
Smith.
car, I went with.
With his friend who had a car. I didn't like it too well. I had heard about that he had a date with one of the girls. And I remember once calling you a wolf, Don.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
No.
You called me and I was ticked off because you had dated someone else. And I called him a wolf. That wasn't a compliment.
When did you have a telephone?
My
Did-
mother always had a telephone.
Always? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Were they party lines? Could you listen to other
Were
people's
they party then, honey?
Yes, Ransom. They had party lines then. I can't remember that our phone was a party line. I don't recall that, or yours. But that was the time of party lines.
So you and Grandma were going on walks, and then her father asked what your intentions
Yeah.
were, and you said to him,
I'm going to graduate from college and marry her. That was okay with him. So
But
I
my
graduated
mother-
from college and married her.
My father believed him, but my mother, because he was older, she thought that he was just kind of playing with me. And she thought, my mother thought he was conceited. I had a dear friend that said he's the most conceited man I've ever seen. That was before she knew him. And they all found out he was not conceited, but that
Mhm.
was sort of the
so your mother was skeptical of him at first.
very. She liked him, but she told me she thought he was kind of playing with me, just enjoying the adulation that I had for him. So when I went to Biola, then after church, he'd walk my mother home. Did you do that most every Sunday?
Yeah.
And she began to like him quite a bit better.
So then he wasn't so conceited anymore.
Maybe she could tell he wasn't.
Were you still going to college when Grandma went to Biola?
Yeah, and I was shocked when I heard she was going to Biola.
Because you thought you had an understanding with her.
Well, and I had never spelled it out clearly, but I always felt in my heart that I had won her over.
But you had mentioned to her father that your intentions were to marry her.
I had.
You know, I don't remember my father telling me about that.
He didn't tell you, but he
Didn't tell
told me that was okay.
I didn't know that Don had said that to me. I believed we were very close, and I didn't have any doubts. And he had one wonderful golden autumn afternoon, walked me home from college, and that day he told me in front of our house under a beautiful autumn tree that he loved me. And I thought, it's all set. And then the Lord said, go to Biola.
You said you heard almost like an audible voice that just told you.
Ransom, I did. You know, my friend was sitting right beside me, and I asked her, did you hear anything, Carol? She said, no. I heard it. It was audible to me, but it was not audible to my friend who was sitting right beside me.
And the message was, go to Biola?
I want you on that train to go to Biola. It was so clear. It had to be. A team of wild horses could not have kept me away from Don. But I knew I could not argue with the Lord. He wanted me to go, and I knew the reason. Because the Lord wanted to know whether I loved him more than I loved Don. It was so clear, and I knew there had to be miracles to get me on that train. My father was the biggest miracle. He called me his baby. I was the youngest, and he knew Los Angeles was a big, wicked city, and the Bible Institute was right downtown in the heart of Los Angeles. So I had from 10 to 5 to be in Cheyenne, Wyoming, to get ready to leave for 4 or 5 months. But my mother understood, and my pastor, whom I dearly loved, said, oh, what faith you have, Minta. I said, Pastor, it didn't take faith. I heard the Lord tell me to go. And he said, I have to tell you, Minta, I think your faith is wonderful, but you have to apply at least 3 months to get him to Biola. And my friend who was going had applied 3 months earlier. And when I called her and said, Ruth, I'm going with you tonight, she said, Minta, you haven't been accepted. You can't. You haven't applied. And I said, well, I'll get in. And so Don and I went to her house to make the call. And I got the Dean of Women at Biola, and I told her I wanted to come with my friend. She said, yes, dear, you can come. I just had a cancellation. My pastor said, I just can't believe this. But then I hadn't yet talked to my father. He didn't know. That was the biggest problem. Well, I had already called Don. He thought I was joking. And he found out I wasn't. We didn't play jokes. But he thought I was joking. And when he found out I wasn't, he came over and he went with me to make the call to see if I could get in. Then my father didn't know anything about it, but he always went to get milk. And he was going to go, and so I said, well, I would like to go with you. So I went with him, and I began to beat around the bush, trying to figure out a way to tell him that I needed to be ready to go on the train tonight. Till I finally said, I have to be on the train tonight to go with Ruth Iowa. That meant we had to leave at 4. And he said, okay, honey, how much money will you need? I couldn't believe my ears. And I didn't even know how much money I needed. Anyway, my father said, okay, I'll get it for you. Well, he got the money and he drove the car. Don went with me and my mother, and I was on the train. But it was one day of miracles, one after another. It was 1 year of miracles, is what it was. But it was the basis for my life, the rest of my life.
But Grandpa, that left you in an emotional stupor.
Yeah, it did.
Pretty-
I was writing letters every day, Ransom.
But there was a girl here that was just chomping at the bit. She was wealthy. She was from Denver. And when I left town, she was very happy.
Well, how did you
Yes.
find that out?
Well, from Don, he'd walk her home from college. Didn't you walk her home?
From the library.
He walked with her a few times. I don't know how
I'd buy her an ice cream cone.
you did. Well, very eager.
She was really after me.
But your attention toward Grandma never wavered, did it?
Never. Because that girl one day, she got tired of me not kissing her, so she jumped across a bench and grabbed me and kissed me with all her might. Didn't change a thing. She couldn't compare with Minta.
How long were you away before you returned?
I came home on the bus at Christmas, and it was all I could do to get on the bus to go back. And then in June, Don said, I'll come after you. But to do that, he brought a friend of his who was also a friend of mine, a man. We were just really good friends. Don brought him as our chaperone, and I had to get permission from the pastor that I lived 2 doors away from, that led Don to the Lord, was the dean of men at Biola at that time.
Really?
Yes, this dear pastor is really first in my heart of all the pastors I've had. He was dean of Biola
Wow.
when I was there. His name was Levi Olson. And with Levi there, I just felt comforted. He was like a father to me almost.
Grandpa, were you aware that the Pastor Levi Olson was one of the deans at Biola?
No,
Don, didn't you know that?
till you told me,
Well-
I didn't know it.
I knew it when I went.
Well, but of course, you came back to Greeley.
He came to Los Angeles to get me, to take me home. He had a car by then.
But Grandma, do you have any of those old letters? Did you keep any of those old letters? Okay. She
Yes,
says yes.
I did. I know right where they are.
Good.
But I couldn't keep them all, but I
Right.
have several. They would be interesting reading.
Yes. So, Grandpa, when you went and picked her up that June in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
I'm sure at that point your intentions were marriage.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And you must have been quite excited at the prospect of seeing her again.
I was. And the girls were all watching us at the institute, were watching us
Oh.
as
Well,
we
my
met each
friends
other.
knew
Oh.
that he was arriving, and they all knew about Don, because
Ah.
I'd told them. And they all went up to the roof of the Bible Institute, which was 14 stories high,
Oh.
and then the roof, and you can see all over. And we were to meet on a certain corner, and they all went up to the top. They said, we're going to go up there and watch.
So you started to teach before you went and got Grandma.
Yeah, 1 year before. Wanted to be sure I could keep a job.
Okay. So you liked teaching when you started it?
Yes, I did.
But you taught a couple years in Colorado,
I taught 4 in Colorado.
4, and then you decided to come to Roseburg.
Yes.
How did you find out about the job in Roseburg?
The brother of 2 good friends of mine was the superintendent of schools in Roseburg. So he
Okay.
called me and asked me
Radisson,
if I wanted to teach out here in Roseburg. I said, yeah. He invited me to come and teach at Roseburg High School.
Well, what made you jump at the opportunity? Was it better pay?
Quite a bit.
Okay.
you've heard us speak of Clifford Smith. He lives in Corvallis. He's 96. He was Don's best friend. He and his brother Lincoln were both Don's 2 best friends. Marvin was the one who became superintendent. So Marvin, every time he'd come home in the summer to Greeley, he would tell Don, you ought to come to Roseburg. And finally, we decided that would be something we should do.
And what year did you come here again?
53.
And that's when you met Roy and Barbara Keller.
Roy, we met Roy then. He came as an insurance man to our door.
Oh, well, that's neat. And then a couple years later, you met Barbara.
We moved and we bought this house. And Roy and Barbara had bought the house next door. Strange.
So we became close friends ever since.
What is there you don't know about us now? His memory, the Don Sharp's attack.
Yep, at 94, right, Grandpa?
Yeah.
94, Sharp as attack. September 2018.